our problems tend to stem from unmet needs in our childhood. There's three basic phases that we're talking here. The first one, sort of 0 to 2, is really our survival phase. And survival for us is we're kept warm, we're loved, we're fed, and we have our nappy changed, and we're kept safe. That's really the survival phase. And as I've said in some of my other videos, this is where your brain's in theta mode and you're taking everything in through your 5 senses, storing it in the memory banks. Everything's going directly into your unconscious, good or bad. It's unfiltered. Then as the limbic brain takes over, you're more into, it's sort of moving from the imprinting phase into the modeling phase. Barrett calls this conforming. And in conforming, what we're learning to do is, so we had safety, surviving as a baby, then as a toddler upwards, the way we survive and get our safety and security is in our family, and that conformity is conforming to the unwritten and sometimes unspoken rules of that family. And that's how we gain our acceptance. So if you go back to the work of games people play, Eric Berne, 1964, quite a famous psychiatrist, and Berne's work, he's known as the father of transactional analysis, and he talks about the fact everything is about acceptance. So the gaining of acceptance, or the seeking of acceptance, and the avoidance of rejection. And you think about us as Stone Age beings for a moment, because you think about our instincts literally coded in our DNA, that instinct keeps us safe. So if we're always seeking to be accepted by others, we would never be expelled from our tribe or our group or our family, be forced to fend for ourselves, and the first time we fell asleep on our own in the wild, a predator might eat us. So that instinct is quite deeply wired. The fact that for the vast majority of people on the planet now, there aren't those threats, but the instincts are still there, and they govern how we behave. So there we are as a small child, seeking to conform to the rules of the family. Then as we become an adolescent, a teenager, the neocortex is starting to take over, but the neocortex doesn't finish in its development until about 25. That's why teenagers can seem to do some incredibly stupid things, and that's because their brains aren't fully rational. So they might look like an adult, but actually the brain is still that of a child in many cases. But in that phase of development, we are seeking acceptance by standing out. That's why this phase is called differentiating. This is about, might be being captain of the rugby team. It might be scoring a goal for the soccer team, having the nicest boyfriend or girlfriend, having the latest trainers, or the fanciest frock. All of these ways we're seeking to differentiate ourselves, to stand out and be accepted and admired by our peers. As you can see, or you will see from your own life and your observations of other people, many people never get past this phase. You'll see men sometimes in their 40s and even 50s, and you ask them, what car they want, and what do they want? They'll want a Range Rover. Why? They need some huge, nearly 3-ton beast on the road. Well, that's differentiation. It tells themselves, and they think it tells other people, that they've made it. And so it really is just a status symbol. So the 3 phases: survival, conforming, and differentiating. And the challenge comes is that the next step is individuating. But we can't individuate unless our needs have been met in those other phases. Because what we'll try to do when we get into differentiating is compensate for the lack of acceptance from earlier in life. And as a number of people I've worked with will probably testify if they were asked, those strategies, those differentiating strategies simply don't work to gain the acceptance they need. A simple example might be if you felt that your father never demonstrated love to you because he was always at work and he didn't want to, help you with your school homework. He didn't want to play football with you in the back garden or any of those things. You might think, oh, my dad didn't love me. You would probably be completely unaware of how hard he had to work to feed his family and the fact that when he got home, he was completely exhausted. I'm just giving you an example. And so you're then seeking a sign of acceptance or approval from that parent that because that parent doesn't feel approved of either, is never going to be forthcoming, whatever you do. And I've met people in their 50s who are still acting to gain acceptance from the parent who has since deceased, but they're still running the same strategies, trying to gain acceptance that will never come. And the trick is to realize that the first person you need to accept is yourself, nobody else. And so the problem for us as a society of human beings on this planet is to help each other get those basic needs met so that we can individuate. And it's only when we individuate we start to recognize the needs of those people around us, and we can move on to be the best version of ourselves, something that a number of people be familiar with, a stage called self-actualization. I think a lot of people claim to be self-actualized. I would doubt that when Maslow first did his work. I think he reckoned that less than 2% of people were really self-actualized. In fact, so few that he couldn't actually build a cohort to study. The problem was that bad. So, and I've no reason to assume that it is somewhat better today, despite the advances in society since Maslow's time. From a psychological perspective, I see much is the same. So we have a situation where many people in society struggle. We talk about mental health problems that you know, if you've watched previous videos, I really don't like the term mental health. I think it's a misnomer. It's actually emotional state would be way more accurate. But we have a lot of people suffering anxiety, suffering depression. We see aggression in society, driven largely, I think, by fear of lack. And it's only when we humans individuate that we're able to connect better with others. Until that point, we still see ourselves as being separate. And you see this in sports teams. Are you a City fan? Are you a United fan? In religion, are you a Protestant? Are you a Catholic? All these dividers, simple one for me. I'm a human who rides a bicycle, but when I do that, I'm labeled a cyclist. And when I get in my car, I'm labeled a motorist. And there seem to be arguments between motorists and cyclists, even though there's a human on the bicycle and there's a human in the car. There's a human in the Catholic Church and a human in the Protestant Church. There's a human watching City and there's a human watching United. But this division, this separateness, acts to keep us in a lower state than if we were connected. And we will never get to the state of integration when we keep our identity separate from those of our fellow human beings. And that's a really important point. Going back somewhat in history, I'm no historian, but I believe at the outbreak of the First World War, the British had a problem. And that was when they gave a man a rifle, he wouldn't shoot a German because what he saw was another human being. So they had to get the PR right to paint the dreaded Hun as the enemy and that needed to be killed and blah, blah, blah. And eventually people bought that story and they were able to start shooting Germans. But it makes you wonder, what would we need to do to actually not have wars, to not have conflicts? Because actually the person at the other end of the gun is just a human being like we are, being directed by somebody else. And the nonsense of it all, I think there was a very famous Christmas Eve truce. I forget which year during the First War that it was, when both sides came out into no man's land, played a game of football, shook hands and went back to their trenches, and the next day started shooting each other again. And you think, how completely pointless is this? And there are enough conflicts at the moment around the planet that illustrate the point. So my advice is find a way to integrate. So every time you feel separate, think about what makes you the same. So if you're a City fan, well, actually you're a football fan, and so is the United fan. If you go to church, well, you're a churchgoer, so is the other person. Might go to different church, you're still churchgoers. You know, rather than say, well, I'm a man and that's a woman's problem, or I'm a woman, that's a man's problem. Well, I'm a man, I might have feminine energy, all right? I have a mix of both. A woman has her energy and she's also got some masculine energy. So we're both human beings, really. That's who we are. So we can connect with each other. And when we connect, we're starting to understand each other's needs. We might find that we have similar values. And when we're connected at a values level, then there are no conflicts and life gets much easier. So if you have questions about that, think about how you can be the same as somebody rather than different as somebody. And I think you'll find that helpful.